1976 to 1980. He has a PhD in the history of the British Communist Party. He also has had significant experience teaching Elizabeth history. He is currently writing a fantasy novel set in the 1580s. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you. I don't want to talk too loudly. Is that a comfortable sound level for everybody?
A bit louder.
I'm afraid you'll have to. A bit louder?
Just close to it, kind of slightly.
Is that better? Oh, I'll say it's clear. Okay. Now, like a lot of people, I started watching Doctor Who when I was very young. I might have been 9. 1960. It started on the ABC, I think in Perth, January the 12th, 1965, and then in Sydney, about 3 days later, the 15th. So, over the years, the scheduling got rather erratic, and by the 1970s, the scheduling was seriously erratic with long gaps. If rain washed out the cricket, they'd dump Doctor Who into the time slot with no advertising, so I missed stories. And then if there was some big sporting thing, Doctor Who would just suddenly be stopped, and it would be sport. And so it was a very unreliable schedule, and I started complaining about this to the ABC. I'm one of those grievance type people. Now, unfortunately, my complaint in early 1976 was ignored. This is before I joined the Science Fiction Association at Sydney Uni in March 1976. But before that, I'd already written to the ABC with a letter complaining about the scheduling, the censorship of some stories which were not screened here at all, because they were deemed, and this was not the ABC's fault, the technical rules about censorship were outside the ABC's remit, but the programs were rated by the censorship board, and the ABC would just buy what was available. So quite a few things were never screened here. And I discovered this when I bought a Doctor Who reference book, and it listed a whole lot of stories, maybe 7 or 8, that I'd never heard of. And that got me into, that was about 1973. So by about 1974, I was starting to lobby cinemas to screen the Dalek cinema films, lobbying the ABCs to screen these missing Doctor Who's. And then I went to New Zealand for a year, came back and picked up where I left off. And the ABC's first letter to me that I've got in my files is the 2nd of March 1976, and they're sort of giving me the brush off. It's not quite go away kid, but a bit like that. I don't like being treated like go away kid. That's one of my buttons. So they got clobbered with the 200 signature petition and a much longer letter. And then that did actually get a vaguely decent reply earlier in April, and we felt we were not being listened to because a detailed fob off is still a fob off, although that's a bit of a joke as an answer to a series of letters and a bit of notepaper. The Science Fiction Club have built the Dalek, which you can see there. I wouldn't claim credit for doing an enormous amount of work on it. I did help the 2 engineering students, and there was a guy who had a workshop with lathes and all sorts of industrial equipment, probably in Lakemba, but that may not be quite right. And he helped make the head of the Dalek, which is actually an odd shape. You can't buy things that are exactly the right shape. I think the gun is actually quite difficult to make. I mean, he did all this stuff with welding and metal cutting and stuff. That's about a year after the Dalek demonstration. This one there is me getting, with some sound equipment, we were making a Dalek film of the Daleks invade Sydney. Now that's another topic for another day. I won't say anything more about it because it's a year later. But the Dalek was ready for a race. Now, have you got the video set up? We took it down to Melbourne, to Ormond College. This is Ormond College, Melbourne University, Easter 1976. Luckily, one of our members in the Science Fiction Club, Kerry Doherty, she had a Super 8 sort of holiday movie camera. So this is the Sydney Uni Dalek. That's Melbourne's Dalek. And when you see a pink monstrosity that looks like it's about to fall apart, that was the Adelaide University Dalek.
Oh, wow.
Which will probably appear in a minute. And the Adelaide University Dalek started to fall apart, even as the race began. I don't think it even finished the race.
Oh. God. Wow.
So we're off. Melbourne took an early lead. Now what Melbourne didn't know is the Sydney Uni Dalek had been built around a tricycle. So once he got going, he was easily able to overtake Melbourne. And Melbourne had thought they were terribly clever. They'd set up the course themselves as an obstacle course with tables like these all over the place. But not knowing that we had a tricycle and so could turn it like that, so their Dalek was having all of the trouble, but they made an obstacle course for themselves, but not for us. So we raced through the obstacle course and won, as you can see, the champion. But Adelaide was trying to come back and was blocking our way back. So we rammed Adelaide and we actually had one of those gas fire extinguishers and a voice modulator and the guy chanted, "Exterminate," and ran the Adelaide out of the way. And Melbourne had to give up because the poor guy overheated inside the Dalek. So this sort of fun nonsense. Early on, I had suggested to the club that we mount a protest outside the ABC because petitions and letters were getting us absolutely nowhere. Oh, if you could just
start the film again, we go back and start the film from.
Well, we just put the.
We
Oh, okay. So we want to be at 1:30. Now, if you just freeze it there. So, in late July, I wrote another letter on behalf of the Science Fiction Club, and we asked the ABC to answer us more fully and to take us more seriously, with not exactly a threat in it, but how do I'm not quite sure how I ended it. A positive response, or we will take further action to underline our determination on this matter. Mass extermination at ABC headquarters. Now, during the August vacation, I went to the letterbox on campus and received this letter from the controller of television, John Cameron, 9th of August. We do not believe we should purchase inferior productions to please this or that pressure group who may be prepared to forgive the shortcomings which would irritate and alienate the majority of our viewers. For all the many admirable features about the Doctor Who series, the regrettable fact of the matter is that it has failed to attract a sufficiently large audience to justify its continued purchase as against alternative material. Now, I probably took a few minutes to realise, because I was looking at the rejection of our other complaints, that this was a new issue altogether, saying that they're not going to buy the thing at all, so much for achieving what we wanted, we're going to get even less. One of the reasons I've read this out is sometime later, there was a new controller of television, 26th of July 1977. Despite indications to the contrary last year, we have no intention of ceasing Doctor Who. So don't believe everything you read in archives, because I've got letters here which prove that and there was plenty of evidence from other people in the that they were not going to screen the series anymore. Now, if you start, we're outside what used to be Broadcasting House in Elizabeth Street. Vicky Doherty carried the film. Vicky's the younger sister. So we prepared placards, Dalek for hire, forget about Medibank, save Doctors Who, and various other things like that. And someone's waving a placard at buses and passers-by. Not filmed is when the police car pulled up and an officer got out, and we were a bit alarmed, thinking, oh my God. But it turned out the guy liked Daleks, and he just wanted to come out and admire our Dalek. Now, if you stop it, if you pause it, now it's blurred, so you won't see it, but you can see the windows are open. And it took me until quite recently to realise, because in many ways I would have said the Dalek demonstration was a failure. The ABC did not change its mind, nothing happened. And for a long time I've been telling people that Doctor Who, some people said I'm the man that saved Doctor Who. Well, I've thought that sounds nice, but really Doctor Who saved itself, because in England it was rating through the roof, and Tom Baker was incredibly popular, and it was pretty likely the ABC would revisit this decision. But what I think is significant with all the heads sticking out of the windows is it's quite clear that a lot of people in the ABC building knew nothing about the decision made by John Cameron. The top management, and this is relevant to you talk about standing up to and forcing down ill-founded officials. A lot of decisions get made by 2 or 3 people, and most of the underlings know nothing about it. And I think really what the demonstration did was force this onto the agenda, because suddenly a whole lot of people in the ABC knew what was going on. And while I was there, the rock station, in those days, 2JJ, not 3 J's, they interviewed me, so that was broadcast. The Dalek ranted and chanted and demanded the extermination of the head of the ABC, and the extermination of all programmers, and the extermination of everybody. So that got a little bit of coverage. I was not terribly, I wouldn't want to exaggerate and say we had an immense media splash. But I do think the head sticking out the windows is important, which it may just appear to be curiosity, but if 1 or 2 managers are making a decision and nobody knows about it, they can get away with it. And you were talking about Murdoch and things, but a lot of things, that was actually in public. How much goes on that we never see? An awful lot more than that. I don't want to go on about it, because bashing the ABC, but they were a bit deceptive and deceitful about it, because the police arranged for us to see a publicity type person, and he later wrote a memo about us. And I knew nothing about this until a friend of mine was doing some work in the ABC archives in 1996. And the memo said it was a well-organised little demonstration with about 6 people. Well, when my friend Damien told me there were 6 of us there, I won't say I hit the roof, but I immediately named 9 people that I knew were there. And that's naming them 20 years later without having to look anything up. And my article, after the demonstration, I started a Doctor Who magazine. And in this, there's an article about the demonstration, and it says it was written within days. It says there were 20 people there, which is hardly a great success by any means, but it's another bit of evidence that bureaucrats will write a memo that suits management, but there's only 6 people there, there's nothing to see here. He could have said 20. I would have thought management wouldn't care about 20 any more than 6. But, so I don't know if he knew how many people he didn't come down to us, we went up to him. So sometime during 1977, John Cameron stepped aside, or was shuffled sideways. I think someone did tell me a long time ago that he got another job or something. So a guy called James Fitzmaurice, who then became the controller of television, and definitely after the middle of the year, because there's still a letter in May 77 saying that there's been no change in their policy, that they're still not going to show it. So we go from no Doctor Who to there's nothing to see here, we never decided not to show the programme. Anyway, James Fitzmaurice was much more friendly to the programme, probably because he looked at the ratings in England. And I've omitted some context, because Janine loaned me an interesting book. Is Ken English? This is our ABC, is that right? And there's a good chapter.
You wrote 2 volumes.
Yes, but this is the one that so chapter about the Fraser government, I think it was Hard Times. And there's a lot of interesting information in that about cost cutting and slashing, and this is in a time of very high inflation. People have been complaining about inflation now, but it was worse in the mid-70s. And wage settlements would sometimes be leaping 10%. That ruins budgets, obviously, at the same time as the federal government saying, well, Woodland gave you too much money in the budget of November last year, and now in sort of April, we're going to pull back a whole lot of that money. So you've got, say, 6 months of your spending still ahead of you, but we're going to actually slash your funding 10%. So that's actually all squashed down into 6 months, not spread over a year. So I think Doctor Who was low-hanging fruit. It was an easy way to cut a bit of spending. They closed, I think, an overseas office in Wellington and another overseas bureau, and closed down some musical groups that the ABC was supporting. I think it was just part of the overall cost cutting. And there was a lot of controversy with the new head of the ABC, or chairman, Sir Henry Bland, had been appointed by Malcolm Fraser. He had, I think, briefly been head of ASIO. So he didn't know what it was like to be in the spotlight and suddenly be criticised for interfering with ABC scheduling of programs like Alvin Turtle. And people were making complaints about how obscene this was, and Henry got involved, and he made himself a bit of a laughing stock and the centre of attention. And within a year of his appointment, he'd gone. And I think the purse strings were probably loosened somewhat, and the inflation settled down a bit. But as I was saying, it was a very popular period for Doctor Who in England, with a rating through the roof with Tom Baker. Now, if you want to continue just to finish the bit of footage, but you can see the head sticking out of the window. You'll notice the terrible old cars. Having just come from New Zealand, where I've been living, it was like going in a time warp, because all the cars there were 20 years old still. 20 years older, but much more expensive. So I went with some backpacking friends, and we thought hitchhiking is for the birds. When there's 3 of you, we'll get a cheap car. Well, there was no such thing. Even a bomb would barely work with all our money. So I've digressed. But the Doctor Who Club came out of this protest. So there are various disputes. Does the Doctor Who Club date itself from the first issue of the magazine, which was arguably when the Science Fiction Club screened one of the Dalek cinema films? And I did posters like this around the university. So this is often taken by the club to be its birthday, but I really think the demonstration almost a month earlier was technically organised by or for the Sydney Uni Science Fiction Association, but the Doctor Who Club grew within the Science Fiction Association and then became completely independent. And we ended up with members in, I think I had a member in Fiji and another one in Singapore, and members in New Zealand, all over outback towns as well. Because Doctor Who in those days the ABC almost had a monopoly in a lot of rural areas. So I think it was probably before microwave signals, so stuff would either have to be, you'd get a physical film of Doctor Who and they'd fly up to Broome or something so they could broadcast it up there. So it was a rather hit and miss affair. And we issued say Doctor Who posters, which could go up in shop windows or on library walls and things. So I have no idea how many people actually wrote in. Other science fiction editors around the country duplicated the leaflet that we sent out, that retyped it and sent it out with newsletters. So thousands of people have found out about it. But there's one interesting thing here. ABC lies, of course this is typical undergraduate, slightly intemperate, as I probably would have been when I was 19. Talbot Duckmanton, you may remember the names of Talbot Duckmanton, was sort of the god emperor of the ABC for ages and ages and ages, saying on television, August the 20th, that the ABC is not guided by audience figures. If this is true, why is Cameron, second to Duckmanton, doing the opposite, which is what I've just read to you in the letter. So it was an interesting learning curve, aged about 19, to discover the manipulations of language and cover-ups within management and how they don't really deal with you openly and above board. So I'm not sure when they actually started screening it in a big way. They had about 10 episodes left to screen, which they had the rights to, and they drip-fed. That was 2 stories, Revenge of the Cybermen and Genesis of the Daleks, and they were screened either in late 76 or early 77, I don't remember all the dates. And then with Fitzmaurice, for 1978, it was like Warragamba Dam bursting, because he bought everything that had backlogged to that date. And that was quite considerable, because up to that point we were dealing with Doctor Who stories from 1974 that hadn't been screened in Australia. So it had been continued to be produced in all that time. And the ABC got this and started screening, I think initially 4 episodes a week, about 4 seasons worth, one after another, and then immediately resumed where they started again. And then the following year they did the same thing, picking up more seasons and getting episodes from America that had been sitting on shelves where the rights had expired, but the ABC was able to negotiate and get the rights. So it was a bit of a Doctor Who. It suddenly went from total drought to one of those typical Aussie deluges where we get a flood. And then people were complaining, like David Hill, I think, complained that there was too much Doctor Who on the ABC and too many British programs. I'm not sure if it was 1979 or 1980. Do you remember, Greg, which year they stopped screening Doctor Who all year? So, no. So there was a year-long pause because they really rather overdone it. But in 81, 82, they started screening some black and white stories that the BBC could give them clearance for, and that's another story. So if anyone has any questions, I can hopefully answer.
How much would you have given back then